welcome back to the morning show here on Rise News. The Supreme Court on Wednesday upheld the elections of 8 governors. Yeah, Dapo Abiodun of Ogun State, Emmanuel of Akwa, Ibom State, Bello Masari of Katsina State, Abdullahi Sule of Nasarawa State, David Umahi of Ebonyi State, Babajide Sanwo-Olu of Lagos, Nasir el-Rufai of Kaduna, and Seyi Makinde of Oyo. In the case of Ogun State, the Mary Peter-Odili-led panel dismissed the appeal of governorship candidate of the Allied People's Congress, that's APM, Adekunle. She ruled that the applicants failed to prove all the allegations. Meanwhile, on the governor of Oyo State, Seyi Makinde, the Apex Court found merit in the appeal filed by Makinde, ruling that the majority judgment of the appeal court was miscarriage of justice.
Now the court has affirmed the majority judgment of the election tribunal, which upheld the election of Makinde as the duly elected governor of Oyo State. The judgment applies to the remaining 3 appeals emanating from the election. And joining us now to discuss this and other national issues is public affairs analyst Achike Chude. Welcome to the morning show.
Pleasure.
You know, so we're talking about the election petitions are rarely overturned. Do you consider this status quo, or do you believe that these 8 governors deserve to have these cases dismissed?
Well, the Supreme Court says that they deserve to have the cases dismissed. And, well, I think there was a lot of anxiety going into it. It's maybe because we have become so enmeshed with courts now deciding what happens at the polling, booth. A lot of us have become so used to the courts ruling either way. We might not agree with the rulings, or we might agree with the rulings, but the reality is that I think it was the late Justice Kayode Shaw, one of those grand old legal luminaries that decried the fact that results of elected officials should be determined at the polling booth and not at the court. But fortunately, we have a situation where virtually every single competition, in the field of election, ends up at the courts, with the courts either upholding or dismissing cases that are brought before them. And that itself has also brought one of the major consequences, and that is the fact that our judges have now become exposed to all kinds of overtures by the political class. And so part of the erosion of the judiciary also is as a result of the fact that so much is at stake when it comes to elections. And so when you bring these things before the court, the Nigerians are generally skeptical about whatever ruling that comes out from the courts. Now, usually if there is a case that seems, at least in the minds of Nigerians, to be loud in terms of acceptability, and the courts rule in favor of that, there's a general acceptance of the ruling of the court. And, so these are some of the issues. And so from that perspective, it's not really for me to say, to look at the merits of each of these rulings. The decisions have been made by the Supreme Court, and the decisions stand. And I think the critical thing is for this people whose election have been upheld by the Supreme Court to get to work and then begin to fulfill the yearnings and the aspirations of their people.
Yeah. Let's talk about Oyo State. Yeah. There's been a lot of reaction as regards the issue in Oyo State because after the election petition tribunal, when they went to the appeal court didn't give a judgment. The judgment of the appeal court was quite iffy. It wouldn't state concisely that Seyi Makinde had this. And that was what made, Abdullahi go ahead to the Supreme Court.
Yeah, he was obviously emboldened by the ruling of the Court of Appeal. That was neither here nor there. So I think he needed something definitive, and he has gotten it, not in the way that he would have expected or he would have hoped for. The Supreme Court has put that to bed. Of course, I'm sure there are very anxious moments for Seyi Makinde and his supporters, especially with the fact that the Court of Appeal did not exactly give them what they desired. And I think that was what, like I said, emboldened his opponent. Again, that itself has been put to bed. Before now, I think Seyi Makinde has been making a lot of in terms of his reputation and what he's been, in terms of perception that people have of him. So it was one place in Oyo State where a lot of people were actually looking. in terms of what they feel the judgment of the Supreme Court is going to be. And again, Oyo State in a way stands out because it is a PDP-controlled state. Perhaps many people did not feel that PDP was capable of winning Oyo State. But, I mean, he won Oyo State, clearly displacing the APC in that particular state. So all eyes have been on Oyo State. People have felt that perhaps the ruling party at the center was going to do whatever it takes to see whether they could influence the decision of the courts.
But a lot of people have started to look and say, okay, this, are we not setting up a precedent that the appeal court says something and the Supreme Court is looking at it otherwise? And I'll give you a clear instance. Yeah. Oshun, Oyetola, the appeal court called that election for Senator Adeleke.
Yes.
And when they went to the Supreme Court upheld Oyetola. A lot of people cried foul as regards that judgment. A lot of people said the appeal court was spot on. This is another case in point. Yes. The appeal court was iffy, but a lot of people in some areas interpreted in such a way that the appeal court said, you know what, the elections that brought you would not stand. That was what the appeal court was saying to Seyi Makinde. But you can see the direction of the Supreme Court.
Well, of course, the issue of contradictions have been there for quite some time, especially with regards to election petition tribunals. We've had instances where a judge, for instance, in maybe a high court judge in Abuja makes a ruling on a similar case that is decided upon maybe in Sokoto State, and then you have a contrary opinion. First of all, apart from having a contrary opinion, these are courts of coordinate jurisdiction. So once a court has ruled, maybe a high court, you don't take it to another high court, bring similar case before the high court, you take it to a superior court to make a ruling on that. So we have. But
there was that impasse in the case of Zamfara. There was that back and forth.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what we're saying. And it's part of the problem of the judiciary that people have been talking about today. There's no doubt about that. And people have been worried. Of course, some years back, it was the issue of expertise motion. And that also caused a lot of problem in the country. So we now have instances where there is clear contradiction sometimes in between what one court says and another court of coordinate jurisdiction also says. And of course, this in no way augurs well for the judiciary. I agree that sometimes, look at the election that I think removed, that brought Rotimi Amechi to power. That is by the Supreme Court. I remember then, I think the late Gani Fawehinmi was alive and made comments about that. And I think the case was that what was sought, what was prayed for, was not, or what was not sought for, or what was not prayed for was what the Supreme Court used as a basis to determine that Amechi, was the one that was validly elected as governor of Rivers State. So some of these contradictions, we have been seeing it in the judiciary, within the judiciary in the country. And I think, again, like I said, you need some level of consistency. It is this inconsistency in rulings, that gives people the impression that there is a lot of untoward events happening within the judiciary. And that is not good for the judiciary in general.
Speaking about the judiciary, I'm wondering what your level of confidence is like now. First off, looking at, like you said, we have a lot of these election tribunals that are basically burdened on the courts to decide who, like in this case, the governors are, as well as contradicting reports, like in this case as well, between the Supreme Court and, the Court of Appeal, and even other ongoing cases, like I have to bring to light the case of Shore, for example. What is your confidence in the judiciary? Because a lot of people are beginning to lose confidence.
Yeah, you know that... before now, at the Supreme Court, when it comes to electoral petition tribunals, the Supreme Court is the court that has to sit when it comes to presidential elections, and that of the governors ended, from the High Court, from the petition, tribunal to the Court of Appeal. That was supposed to be the last, court. So once they make a ruling, and if that ruling had been done, Oyetola Adeleke would most likely have remained, would have been made governor of Osun State. But again, we had a situation where the Supreme Court suddenly assumed jurisdiction over cases that have been decided by the Court of Appeal. You know, so that was also in itself is a distortion, and I think a lot of people questioned that. You know, then but beyond that again is the fact. I mean, some of the things you have also talked about, the paradox, the contradictions, you know, that we see, and the way Nigerians view our courts today, not exactly like they used to in the past. The reality is that the Nigerian society has broken down to a very, very, you know, I mean, largely broken down, and you're talking about virtually every segment of the society, apart from the arms of government, of course, the executive, judiciary, and the legislature. You cannot absolve them. You cannot remove them from the endemic problems that the country is facing. They are also enmeshed in these problems. You know, same especially when you talk about corruption, virtually all the arms of government. So the judiciary has not been exonerated. We have seen what the judiciary has done in the past, and even in terms of some of the rulings that we have also talked about. Some of them have been shrouded in very serious controversy, you know, and then, and then again, and that in a way has eroded the credibility of the judiciary, the hopes of the common man, because before now, and you must also contrast with the kind of judiciary we had even before now, under the military dispensation, for instance. Where the military was famous for their ouster clauses, edicts cannot be challenged, decrees cannot be challenged, and all of that. But once in a while, we had judges that were very courageous, that understood what the law, you know, ought to do in society.
Well, but so, we had judges too that were otherwise.
No,
a clear case is the judge that sentenced fella that came out to finally say that I knew he did nothing, but because of pressure.
But at the same time, yeah. While it was, I mean, it was a controversial ruling, but in a way, I think the man tried to redeem himself. In a way, I'm not saying he did that. The fact that he had the courage, the fact that he had the courage to go and meet this person and say, look, I did wrong. You understand? My hands were tied. To some extent, it does not redeem him completely, but his conscience
history will not forget him.
But history might be fair to him, might be better than
He's
to
the
others.
One of the few.
Yeah, that's his one. I mean, he had that courage, you know, to do that. You know, and so many other things you look at. So it tells you that.
Okay. We'll go to a quick break now. We'll come back and talk about this, and I'm going to pose a question to you. You know, about the personality of the judiciary and the institution itself. We'll be right back. I will talk some more. Keep it locked right here. Okay, welcome back to the morning shows right here on the Rise News channel. And we're talking about, you know, national issues and the court rulings in this country. I mean, and I was talking about, before we went to that break, the personality of the judiciary and the judiciary as an institution. And I'll give a clear instance. You see, so in that fine era where we had the likes of Justice Okoro Idogu, I got his name now, that sentenced fella, despite he didn't do anything, that came back saying, I knew there were no evidence that you had not done anything, but I just, because there were pressures. I feel like made that famous, the judge don't beg me. You also juxtapose it with the fact that this was the same era that we still had the likes of Justice Kayode Esho. We still had the likes of Justice Chukwudinfo Oputa. And they were still there. And we still go back and refer to them today as men that held the judiciary. Is it the problem that we don't have those great jurists any longer? And should the judiciary be dependent on the strength of the jurist or the institutional disposition it stands for?
Weighty questions. You know, but the reality, you know, I think there's a part of a scripture that says, do not say that those old days are better. But seriously, when we sit down, we can only look back with nostalgia and say those old days are better.
Is that not a problem?
We had, of course, it is of course, it is a problem. Because the reality is that in this country, what we have discovered, and I think this is empirically verifiable, is that every succeeding government seems to be worse off than the preceding government. So what that tells you is a continuous decline in the way we do things in Nigeria. Look at, even by the time Obasanjo left the scene, somebody took over from OBJ. You know, people tended to believe that the Obasanjo government was better. Somebody took over from the person who took over from Obasanjo. The same thing, no, that government, no, as bad and as perfidious and as notorious as the previous government was. The succeeding government was excoriated for not being as good as the preceding government. So what it tells you is that As you have this decline in governance in the country, there's a decline in every aspect of our national life because everything is hinged on governance. Ultimately, at the end of the day, because it is with the right kind of governance and governing environment that you build society, you build education, you build road infrastructure, you improve on the welfare of the people and all that. This is what governance does. So when you have a decline in governance, you're going to have some of the problems that we're having today. And so you bring it back to the issue of the judiciary. There's also a decline even in the politics of this country. There's a decline in the political actors in the country. I think it was the former Senate President, Joseph Wayas, that talked about and acknowledged the fact that there was a lot of inconsistency and contradiction in their governance in terms of corruption and the rest. But he said that what we are seeing today, and this is about 10 years ago, that what we are seeing today pales into, what we did in the past pales into insignificance compared to what is going on today. So there's also...
Pales into insignificance?
Yes, yes. So what it means is that even the level of political leadership, as bad as the people of the past were, 20, 30 years ago, they are far better than what we have today. And that is why, again, the country is almost on its knees. So these are some of the issues. And so you cannot remove that also from the judiciary. The judiciary is part of the Nigerian society. As the Nigerian society decays and declines, every sector, every segment of the society, is also, cannot be unaffected. The judiciary, I mean, you talked about great, minds in the judiciary. Kayode, great minds, bold, people that were bold, people that also understood what the purpose and the objectives of the law should be, to serve the public interest, to serve the interest of the people. And that was why some of them could summon the courage, even against the wishes of the military government, as bad as it was. For instance, I remember that it was Justice Acholonu that insisted that the DSS must release the passport of Gani Fawemi when it was seized. The military did not like it, but they had to comply. So we didn't see the military invading the courts and all of that. So this is what we are beginning to see today, most unfortunately. So the people that have succeeded the judges of the past, are nowhere near, when it comes to the fecundity of the intellect, when it comes to courage, when it comes to belief in the law as it should be, they are nowhere near. These are you could say that these people are Lilliputans, compared to the giants of those days. But again, it is not just a problem with the judiciary. It's a problem with the Nigerian society. So
it even snowballs into even education, because if you are saying they are nowhere in terms of intellect, I mean, we forget that we had lawyers like the likes of Daddy Oyema, in this country. We had lawyers like the likes of Rotimi Williams, Timmy the Law, that was said that you could argue both sides effectively as though they are one. That was said about Timmy the Law. He could argue both sides effectively as though they are one. I mean, there are not many people. We had the golden days that people went to the courts just to listen to the fertility of arguments.
I agree. But I think the apogee of this contradiction now that you are even talking about is the fact that the president of this country went before, a gathering of lawyers. And he said that in some circumstances that the rule of law must be made subservient to security imperatives of a country. And you know what happened? Some of the lawyers were clapping for him. It does not happen anywhere. Why? They didn't have a proper understanding of what the law should be. Otherwise, you will not see them clapping for the president until maybe it was made clear to them. But these are lawyers. So it gives you an idea, just what you have just said, about the level of education, the kind of education that we are getting in this country. Obviously, those lawyers that responded in that manner were half-baked, as far as I'm concerned. I don't have to be a lawyer to realize that there was a fundamental flaw in the argument that was made by the president, that the rule of law must be made subservient to. Because when you talk about security, I mean, the stability of a nation is dependent on the rule of law. So when you do not have the rule of law, it undermines the security of a country. But they didn't seem to understand it. So I agree with you. But then again, even the present generation of students that we have, how closely related are they to the kind of students that we had in the 90s, for instance, in the early in late 80s. Because we had a situation, for instance, where they would tell us, then we were students, we were teenagers, but they would tell us that maybe the wife of the president has a wristwatch factory in France, has a perfume factory in Switzerland, and all of that. And the students, that was enough, for the students to weigh in on the issue, because the students were able to make a distinction or to make a comparison and to understand that the actions of the political leadership of this country today has a way of impacting on their lives, on their future tomorrow. But we hear all kinds of stories today. And I mean, as a result of that, we had to make sure that most of the campuses in the country, the entire country, almost at the same time, were closed down because we wanted a resolution to the issue of corruption in the country. These were the youths of those days. These were the youths that understood what it meant, what leadership should mean. The Nigerian youth today finds himself in a morass of passivity and ignorance. He does not make a connection, and so so you see them, some of them looking at discredited politicians, for instance, as mentors, to them, and that tells you that there is a serious disconnect. I agree that our education has suffered tremendously, seriously.
Wow, I definitely agree with you. But I would like to move on to, still talking on the judiciary, system here, looking at how court orders are being constantly flouted. Is it that the security agencies that are supposed to implement these court orders have fallen flat? What's the problem here? Because if you compare Nigeria to a country like the US, for example, once a judge gives a court order, you know that the officers of the court have the duty to carry those orders out. In the case, I'm sorry, I keep referring to the case of Shure. I was very surprised that in the entire time that we had that commotion, there was not one officer in sight that could put an end to the debacle and the craziness that went on in court that day.
Too many people have a completely different take on what happened that day. The reality is that this has nothing to do with the DSS or with the police when it comes to flouting of orders. It has everything to do with the government of the day. It is the body language of the government that determines the action of security officers. The DSS is an elite organization. When you interact with some of them, you will know how decent and gentlemanly some of them are. So how come all of a sudden they begin to behave in this manner? Because there's a body language they're looking at. There are perhaps instructions, directly or indirectly, that they have to listen to. And so that is responsible for the action that they undertake. These actions, I hope you know, brought a lot of opprobrium to the nation, international condemnation and all of that. Why would the government of the day, that is anxious to give a positive image of itself, allow an institution of the government to embarrass the entire country? So it tells you that it is beyond the DSS. It is like elections, for instance, that we have. I was in Kogi State for the Kogi State election as an observer. People were supposed to have deployed 35,000 policemen. And people are saying, we're asking the question, how come a few miscreants were able to overrun the police? Of course, they did not overrun the police. The police was looking at body language.
We'd like to say a very big thank you to you, Achike Chude, because we definitely have to have this conversation
It's
again.
always a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you.
That brings us to the end of the show. My name is Shaiton Atigari.
And I'm el-Rufai Seyi.
Thank you for watching. From my entire team here in Lagos, enjoy the rest of your morning and make sure you rest.